One of the best questions that we hear from people is this: how do I know if my pain is coming from my body or my brain? And even how this question is posed is interesting because it assumes that they're separate. And in reality, the brain is always hungry for information from the body. It's always looking for new types of input, new information from the environment that it can use in order to interpret our conscious experience. So the brain loves information from the body. And in return, after it's processed with emotions, with past memories, that information is then fed back through to the body to help us determine how to move and how to interact with the environment. But let's break this question down into a few different perspectives here. One way to look at this is sort of the journey that sensation takes as it goes from the surface of the skin, from the sensory neurons, all the way up to the brain and becomes a conscious perception. So it's almost like a relay race. The sensory neurons pass on this information about a stimulus to the spinal cord. Spinal cord hands it off to the brain. And then once it gets to the brain, it becomes a conscious perception. And in that sense, there are three neurons that are linking what happens at the surface of our body to the brain. And so whenever I look at someone's pain presentation, I often think about it in this way. There could be a certain percentage of pain that's explained by the first part of this journey, the second part, or the third part. And often they all play a role. But in chronic pain, the role of the brain becomes more and more exaggerated over time because we have this lived experience of all the consequences that happen as a result of living with pain. So in a sense, the first and second stages of this process at the sensory neuron level and the spinal cord level are considered nociception. It's only once that nociceptive or sensory signal is handed off to the brain and it becomes paired with these emotions and memories and interpretations that it becomes the conscious perception that is pain. So just to make this a little more clear, nociception is the sensory detection of thermal, mechanical, chemical stimuli by primary afferent sensory neurons. And it may or may not lead to pain because there are lots of sort of roadblocks that are naturally built into our bodies at the spinal cord and even at the brainstem that reduce the likelihood that signals will lead to pain in the brain. Whenever we look at the definition of pain, however, the pain is the conscious part. It's the unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that's associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in such terms. And pain may or may not require that sensory nociceptive signal. And that's a key point. So first, let's start here. The question then comes, what happens once that information is in the brain? It passes through multiple maps, topographical maps. And these maps are how we tell where a sensory signal came from in the body. Now, what you'll notice here is these maps they're various varying resolutions, spatial resolutions. So the thalamus map, it's very broad, sort of gross. It's a very vague map. And it is only once the thalamus hands that information off to the primary somatosensory cortex that you get more of the discrimination about where exactly in the body the sensory signal came from. And there's also a map in the primary motor cortex and in the insula. And there's evidence that there are even other body maps that this information is funneled through. So there are at least 4 maps. And this is how our brains interpret where sensory information is coming from. So that doesn't mean that the body part is not important, but it means that even the way that we judge where something is from is a process that happens in the brain. And one of the ways I think of this is almost how how light is shown through stained glass windows and how it filters light into these distinct patterns based on each configuration of the window. So each of those maps can also be thought of as a stained glass window, and the sensory signal is light being shown through each of those windows And this is also one reason why some of these maps may be a little imprecise. I won't go into this now, but for instance, whenever there's referred pain or more vague areas of pain, sometimes it has to do with how specific the maps in the brain are. And that's one of the reasons why movement and ongoing stimulation of the surface of your skin is really important to keep these maps accurate. So that's one of the hidden benefits of moving and of having continued input, even whenever you have chronic pain. So in this way, a perceived sensation never happens in the body part. Its location is projected across these multiple maps. And the purpose is to help the brain understand where it's coming from so that we can act accordingly, we can adapt to it, and we can learn from it, essentially. So that's another way of looking at this question of how do I know if the pain is coming from my mind or my body? In the sense, pain is always happening in the mind, and even the location of the pain is encoded in the brain. So then the question comes, how does the brain use this information? So we can see here, we have the nociceptive input channeled from the sensory neurons up through the spinal cord to the brain to create the conscious experience of pain. And because pain is always both sensory and emotional, that emotional learning that is fundamentally linked to the experience of pain that you can feel every moment, you can feel that it's emotional because it hurts. That is what drives the creation of long-term pain memories, which is why one of the big fundamental shifts in how we've understood pain is that chronic pain is an emotionally maintained memory. And it's fueled by ongoing, continued experiences that you feel in your life every single day. The decisions you have to make differently, the way that you have to move that's different from how you used to move, the negative emotions that are involved in the pain experience, the sympathetic arousal that triggers the stress response whenever pain starts to rise and you start to go into a pain flare. These are all things that are intrinsically linked to the sensory experience itself, to where they can no longer be pulled apart from the sensation of pain. So whenever pain becomes chronic, it is a chronically maintained emotional pain memory, and it then becomes maintained by your thoughts, your emotions, your movements, your decisions, your motivations. And although this might feel a bit overwhelming, one of the beautiful things about this is that by understanding the true nature of chronic pain, we now understand what is needed to treat it. And what is needed to treat it is this multidisciplinary approach, where you're looking at your thoughts, you're looking at how you feel, you're looking at how you move and how you avoid moving. All of these different parts are different keys, and different people based on their pain journeys have, it's almost like different unique puzzle pieces play a big role in their pain, which is why personalization of pain care is absolutely essential. So I hope that by bringing you through this journey of the nervous system, that you feel like you have a better understanding of this question about, is pain in the body or in the brain? And if you're interested in learning more, please consider joining our research study by visiting our website here. And please look for more information from me. As I get your excellent questions, I'll be creating videos to answer them.